Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. What if I told you that one single study, the kind buried deep in the scientific journal, just a few charts, a few tables, and some jargon, completely rewired how the entire world thinks about aging? This study convinced millions of people to fear muscle, to avoid protein, to suppress growth, to fast endlessly, and to believe that one of the most essential hormones in your body, IGF-1, was actually trying to kill them. But here's the truth no one told you. That study was based on missing data, excluded over 18,000 people, never tracked what anyone ate, and the number of people who got cancer was lower than the average population. Yet, from that one manipulated conclusion, a global longevity industry was born. Welcome to the video that exposes it all. This study is called IGF and the Risk of Morbidity and Mortality from Cancer, Cardiovascular Disease, and All Causes in Epic Heidelberg. Sounds impressive, right? Big name, big claims, big consequences. It followed 25,540 people in Germany for nearly 17.5 years. They wanted to find out if higher levels of IGF, the hormone responsible for growth, repair, and muscle, might be linked to cancer, heart disease, and early death. And what did they report? That people with higher IGF had an increased risk of breast cancer, prostate cancer, cardiovascular disease, and all-cause mortality. They even claimed they followed a U-shaped curve, meaning both too low or too high IGF were dangerous. And from that point on, IGF became the villain, the hormone you were told to suppress at all costs. But here's what they did not tell you, and what I am about to reveal. It changes everything. Let's put aside the headlines and look at what actually happened. This study, like I said, followed 25,540 people for 17.5 years. That's 447,950 total person years of data. And in all that time, do you know how many people got cancer? 1,668 people. That's just 6.53% of the entire cohort over nearly 2 decades. And here's the kicker. According to the global cancer stats, over 25% of people will get cancer in their lifetime. So this group didn't have higher risk, they had a lower risk. And guess what? They weren't even elite athletes or lifelong vegans. They were just regular people living normal lives with normal IGF levels. So let me ask you this. If IGF is so dangerous, why did this group do better than the general population? That question alone should have stopped the narrative cold. But instead, it got louder. And what came next is where the real manipulation begins. Here's where it gets shady. The study didn't measure IGF-1 in all 25,540 people. Nah, they only measured it in 7,461 people. That means over 18,000 people, 70% of the cohort used in the study, were left out. So, how did they come up to the conclusion about cancer and IGF-1? Easy. They used a shortcut called Case-Cohoax Design. Sounds scientific, right? But here's what it really means. They picked a representative subgroup of 3,700 people from the full cohort. Then they added all the cancer cases, 1,668 of them, along with the cases of cardiovascular disease and deaths. This added up to 7,783 people. But wait, IGF-1 was only measured in 7,461. So, 322 people in the analysis had no IGF data at all. And guess what? The study never told us who those 322 were, whether they had high or low IGF-1, or if they got cancer. That is selective inclusion. And it opens the door to statistical distortion. Imagine leaving out key puzzle pieces and still claiming you solved the picture. That's what happened here. They use what's called hazard ratios to claim that high IGF-1 equals more cancer. But that conclusion was based on a fragmented sample, with missing cases and over 70% of the population group ignored. That's not science. That's rigged outcome dressed up as research. Now here's the part they hope you never notice. Out of the full 25,540 participants, IGF-1 was only measured in 7,461 people, which means 18,079 people, more than 70% of the entire study, were completely left out of the IGF analysis. No blood test, no follow-up, no risk calculation. So how did they account for the massive gap? They claimed that a subcohort of 3,700 people, 1,810 men and 1,890 women, could represent the entire 18,000 unmeasured group. Yet, they used just 3,700 people to speak for the 18,000. That's like polling 3 people in a room of 20 and assuming you know what everyone is thinking. It assumes every factor, diet, exercise, lifestyle, illness, genetics, was perfectly captured by those 3,700 people. But life doesn't work that way. And here's the real kicker. What if many of those unmeasured 18,000 people had high IGF and never got cancer? What if the real profile of health and longevity was buried in the people they never measured? You'll never know because they never looked. They built an entire conclusion around a group they didn't even test. They turned around and told the world, this is proof that high IGF-1 causes cancer. That's not just bad science, that's academic sleight of hand. If the goal was to prove that a higher IGF-1 causes cancer, there's one thing they should have shown first. The actual IGF levels of the people who got cancer. Seems obvious, right? Show us the real breakdown. Lay out the facts. How many cancer patients had higher IGF-1? How many had low IGF-1? How many were right in the middle? But here's what they gave us instead. No table, no chart, no raw numbers, no IGF profile of the 1,668 cancer cases. Instead, they grouped IGF-1 into quintiles, ran a statistical model, and popped out a hazard ratio. That's like saying, we won't show you how many people were speeding, but trust us, they caused the accident. They never showed how many cancer cases came from each IGF-1 level. Not one visual, not one breakdown, nothing. And you have to ask, why not? Because maybe it would expose the truth. That many people with high IGF never got cancer. That people with low IGF-1 still did. And that their entire narrative would have unraveled on the spot. This is not transparency. This is scientific theater. When a study avoids showing you the raw data, especially when that data could disprove the claim, is not by accident. It's because the numbers didn't back up the message. Let's slow down for a second and do one thing they didn't want you to do, the math. Because that scary headline you keep hearing, people with high IGF-1 had a 31% higher risk of cancer. Sounds terrifying until you look at what it actually means. Let's go straight to the source. The epic Heidelberg study followed 25,540 people for 17.5 years. I mentioned this twice already. And during their entire time, 1,668 of them got cancer. That's an absolute cancer risk of just 6.5%. Now, break it down by cancer types. Prostate cancer, 577 cases, 2.26% risk. Breast cancer, 623 cases, 2.44% risk. Then next is lung cancer, 202 cases, 0.79% risk. And finally, you have colorectal cancer, 268 cases, 1.05% risk. That's the real baseline risk. But then the study says high IGF-1 increases prostate cancer risk by 31%. Sounds huge, right? Let's see what this really means. If the average man in the study had a 2.26% chance of getting prostate cancer, as I explained a short earlier, and that risk increases by 31%, then here is the math. You take 2.26%, add 31% of that, which is about 0.7%. And guess what you get? You get a total risk of 2.96%. You heard that right. All the hype about 31% increased risk amounts to from 2.26% to 2.96%, a whopping difference of 0.7 percentage point. That's it. No one put that on the headline. No one told you the real story because 0.7% increase in cancer doesn't sell headlines, but 31% increase in risk definitely does. And this was not just hype, it was misdirection. They made you think high IGF-1 was dangerous. They made you afraid of something that supports muscle, movement, recovery, and functional aging, all based on a relative risk that barely moved the needle. This is the mathematical illusion that fooled the longevity world. Here's the crazy thing, they tracked IGF-1 only once. They blamed it on events that happened up to 17.5 years later. That's like blaming your teenage haircut for your divorce at 50. Now let's talk about the biggest mystery of all. In figure 1 of the study, they quietly admit that IGF-1 levels were only measured in 7,461 out of 7,783 people in the case cohort. That's 322 people with no IGF-1 data. Gone. That's crazy. Those 7,783 people included all the 1,668 cancer cases, which means some of those 322 missing IGF-1 profiles could have been cancer cases. Let that sink in. What if some of those missing profiles were people with low IGF-1 who still got cancer? What if some of them had high IGF-1 and never got cancer? We'll never know because they were excluded. And what's even more suspicious, they never once tell us how many of those 322 missing cases were cancer. Not a sentence, not a footnote, not even an asterisk. They just vanished and took the data with them. And then turned all that into a headline that reshaped how millions of people view protein, aging, and longevity. This is where the damage really started, because this wasn't just a quiet paper published in some obscure journal. This particular study and a handful like it sparked a full-blown movement, a movement that changed how millions of people eat, train, recover, and age. This was the new gospel. Protein is dangerous. Muscle growth is risky. Fasting will save you. Shrinking your IGF-1 is the ultimate biohack. And who jumped on board? Longevity influencers, biohacker startups, Silicon Valley tech bros, longevity clinics, fasting evangelists, supplement companies with IGF-lowering stacks. They all parroted the same message. High IGF-1 equals cancer. Lower it. Stay small. Live longer. But now you know the truth. They didn't measure IGF-1 in over 70% of the population group. They lost 322 cases due to missing data. They never showed the actual IGF-1 levels of the cancer patients. They ran statistical models, not real breakdowns. And they inflated 0.7% difference into a 31% relative risk. And yet, this flawed model shaped a multi-billion-dollar industry. An entire movement was built around the fear of a molecule that builds muscle, supports the brain, maintains neuromuscular junctions, that's part of your motor units, preserves motor units, helps you recover, keeps you strong as you age. They didn't just get the science wrong, they hijacked the future of aging. And they actually told millions of people to weaken their bodies in the name of longevity. The IGF scare turned into a gold mine. Big money was made. People spent billions on books, supplements, blood tests, and so-called longevity programs. All telling them one thing, lower your IGF-1 if you want to live longer. Wait a second, it gets even darker. Because they told on themselves. And the hidden agenda. It's right there in the study. Are you ready for the reveal? You want to see how deep the manipulation goes? Let's rewind for a second. This study was supposedly about IGF-1 levels and cancer risk and cardiovascular issues. That's what the study is about, right? They didn't track what people ate, did they? They didn't control their diets. They didn't follow up on their habits. Just a single blood sample measured once at baseline. But then right there, buried in the discussion, they dropped this. Earlier studies reported that IGF-1 levels and mortality were associated with intake of protein, milk, potassium, calcium, magnesium, phosphorus, and vitamin B6 and B2. Wait, what? What does that have to do with anything in this study? They didn't even track diet, so why bring this up? Because here is the hidden message. These nutrients increase IGF-1, and we just told you IGF-1 is dangerous, so you might want to avoid this. Let's break that down. Animal protein, demonized. Dairy, guilty by association. essential nutrients, potassium, magnesium, calcium, and phosphorus. Crucial B vitamins linked to brain, nerve, and mitochondrial health. They painted these four horsemen of health, the essential minerals, as dangerous, based on no dietary data whatsoever. And it doesn't stop there. In our recent analysis, we found that animal intake was associated with increased mortality, largely driven by cardiovascular disease. I mean, are you serious? This study didn't test that. They just snuck it in as if it validated the IGF-1 findings. You know what this is called? Narrative planting. That's old style manipulation. They seeded the idea that protein equals high IGF-1, IGF-1 equals cancer, therefore protein and nutrients equal dangerous. And boom, you just launch a fear-based longevity doctrine. All without measuring food, following diet, or providing causation. They linked IGF-1 to life essential nutrients without proof and fed that to the anti protein movement. And the result? A manipulated study created a massive industry of restriction while weakening the very system that protects you from aging. This was not just about IGF, this was about control of the narrative and your biology. Let's step back for a moment. You've seen how the IGF-1 study manipulated its data, ignored 70% of the cohort, and played statistical shell games. But now here comes the final blow. The authors had a pre-existing bias, and they revealed it. Just 3 months before they published this IGF-1 paper, some of the same authors dropped another study, attacking animal protein. Here is the present study, the lead author, Thracias Mukama, and another author, Rudolf Cakes. Now here's the study from 3 months ago attacking animal protein. Let's read what they said. Factors uniquely associated with animal protein could perhaps explain higher mortality. Could perhaps? That's not science, that's speculation. But they weren't done. They went on. Branched chain amino acids, BCAAs, largely present in animal protein sources, could lead to insulin resistance, excessive weight, etc. Hold on. Are they talking about the same branched chain amino acids that athletes, bodybuilders, and performance doctors have branched for decades? The ones essential for muscle repair and metabolic function? But wait, it gets worse. They continue. Another hypothesis is that IGF-1 has been postulated to link animal protein-rich diets to increase anabolic activity and the development of cancer cells. There it is, the setup, the bait. This was not an unbiased exploration of IGF-1 and health. This was a premeditated narrative starting with animal protein is bad, branched chain amino acids are risky, IGF-1 promotes cancer. Then 3 months later, boom, they published the IGF-1 study to make it all seem true. Here's the kicker. A single clear biological pathway has yet to be identified. Translation. We have no proof, but we're going to keep saying it anyway. Why this matters. This is how scientific fear narratives are born. Speculate about harm from protein, tie it to IGF-1, run a flawed study that confirms it, launch a media wave, influence public policy, diet guidelines, and the supplement industry. And guess who pays the price? People trying to build muscle, older adults trying to stay strong, anyone trying to preserve motor units and resist aging. They were told to fear the very thing that helps them survive aging, all based on bias, not biology. Now that we cleared away the noise, let's talk about what IGF-1 actually does. Because this hormone they spend years demonizing, it might just be the one of your body's greatest defenders. Let's break it down. Number one, IGF-1 protects your brain. Having low IGF has been linked to health problems related to metabolic syndrome, both in living bodies and in lab studies. IGF-1 is important for making new brain cells, keeping your brain flexible and healthy, helping nerves grow, building blood vessels, keeping your metabolism working, and clearing waste from the brain. It isn't some bad guy hormone. It's actually essential for growth, repair, and survival, especially as you get older. And yet, they are telling people to suppress it. Number two, IGF-1 preserves your muscles. Muscle isn't just for looks, it's functional tissue. Your ability to move, stand, balance, and live independently depends on it. IGF-1 activates muscle protein synthesis, satellite cell regeneration, recovery from injury. Number three, IGF-1 preserves your fast twitch fibers and motor units. Many studies have found that as people age, their levels of IGF-1 naturally decrease. This decline plays a role in the breakdown of neuromuscular junctions and the loss of motor units. Neuromuscular junctions are very important for motor units. Supporting this idea, experiments in mice show that an increase in IGF-1 specifically in muscle tissue reversed age-related muscle loss, sarcopenia, and prevented typical aging changes and losses of fast-twitch muscle fibers. Translation: it helps your nervous system stay wired to your muscles. That's youthful movement at the cellular level. Number four, IGF-1 supports your cardiovascular system. It improves microcirculation, nitric oxide production, vascular function, and insulin sensitivity. So why are we suppressing something that keeps your brain, muscles, nerves, and heart young? And they told you to suppress it based on a manipulated study. There are other studies also that didn't even measure 70% of the people. Lost data on 322 cases and never show you the real IGF profiles of those who got cancer. Let that sink in. The science was bent. The narrative was planted. The damage was real, and now you know better. Or you should know better. You've been fed a lie, and it's not too late to rewrite your story. Start fueling your body with real protein, not powders and promises. That's what I do. I eat 200, 250 grams of protein. Train your nervous system. Preserve your motor units before they vanish. Stop fearing growth. It's how you stay alive. Question the science that left out 70% of its own data. Because here's the truth. Muscle is youth. Movement is medicine. IGF-1 is not your enemy. And the longer you wait to rebuild what's left, the harder it gets. So now you have a choice. Keep shrinking or fight back and go beyond the limit.